Welcome to Charts Today, European Opening. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Tuesday, the 13th of November, comes to you from London. We start by looking at the dollar index. Dollar pushed to 16-month highs yesterday, holding that strength basically, so still looking strong. And the euro was weaker yesterday, recovering a little bit this morning, but looking very bearish against the dollar now, with this new downside target of 95 cents, where the euro becomes worth less than a dollar, is activated. Japanese yen, dollar looks strong here as well on all three time zones, time frames. Remembering this is my long term, my medium term, my short term, and we see the sterling actually fell quite heavily over the last few days, just finding a bit of a floor. If we go any lower, we activate a new downside target to 122 against the dollar. Looking at sterling against the euro. We are still bearish short term here as well, but medium term still bullish, so a mixed picture there. Swiss franc, we see sterling is below the cloud and looking bearish, and against the Aussie dollar, in sympathy with the Australian dollar, the sterling is looking lower here as well. Bitcoin down 0.4%, still in a downtrend here, so bearish on all three time frames. And looking at the S&P 500 index, we see that we are bullish above the cloud. The Nasdaq, we are actually just starting to fall below on the cloud, so starting to look a little bit more bearish. And the Dow, we see here also fell away yesterday by 2.3%. The Russell 2000 index also embarking on falls, and this morning the futures, the S&P future is up about 1/3%, and the Nasdaq A-mini up by a similar amount, but still in bearish territory. The futures in Europe are flat this morning, so the FTSE future is little changed, and the DAX future also little changed. We did see the FTSE actually opened higher yesterday and then fell away by 0.75% in the end on those US falls, and the FTSE 250 also lower, and the DAX was down 1.75%. The CAC 40 down just under 1%. Tokyo falling more heavily again today, down 2% on the 400, and the Hang Seng index is relatively flat, slightly lower. Chinese stocks are actually up just under 1% and strangely looking short-term bullish, but the charts are still very bearish on the medium and long-term charts. And if we look at the Sensex, we've also moved into bullish territory there. The Aussie market up 1.8%, down 1.8%, and commodities wise, Brent crude falling a further 1%, so unwinding yesterday's move, and WTI also moving lower. The commodity bucking the trend is US nat gas. That's making new 4-year highs and really jumping out at this target of 410. So that's been really strong. And looking at other commodities, we're perhaps much the same. It's just nat gas bucking the trend. Gold is still bearish on the short-term chart, so the strong dollar not helping there. And if we look at silver, the same. US 10-year Treasury yield sitting at 3.16% and in bearish mode at the moment on the short-term chart. Bonds falling in Europe, with some jitters ahead of Italy, but we are still on the bullish on that short-term chart for bonds, but the medium and long-term charts are terrible. Amazon fell 4% yesterday, so that's turning them short-term bearish again. Apple was down 5%. We've said that this is our main concern for the market at the moment, and that is now looking very worrying indeed, with downside targets of 8, 14%, and then 3 and 4% on the longer term picture. Alphabet was down 2.5%, and Facebook was down 2.5%, looking very bearish indeed. Now the long-term chart for Facebook turning bearish. Looking to stocks, and we'll take a quick look at the Nasdaq first. We saw yesterday that the big moves were really, there's only a handful of stocks that were up, but lots of stocks down heavily, and we saw here Line down 8%, Nvidia down a further 7%, Tesla down 5.4%, and here we're seeing the weekly, the daily, and my on-balance volume and relative strength of the Dow Jones. This data all coming from Yahoo Finance, so very very useful there. Looking at world indices, we see here a sea of red on the US market. We saw in Asia we've got China and India up, but the rest of the market's down. Jakarta up very slightly, not a market we look at very much, but we're seeing here most markets are down in Asia. Looking at the Australian market, we have got some stocks up quite well. We've got Anacoba, Main Group, Main Pharma. Looking like they're making a long-term recovery, but really it's the falls, and Afterpay touched down further 6%. They're now in bearish territory on the medium-term chart. Insetec Pivot also lower, Bapcor also breaking its trend. So we're seeing that really happening quite a lot. Indian oil is up. Bucking the trend, but for oil falling, but the chart's terrible. Underperformed the Dow Jones by 30% this year, for example. Bharat Petroleum is also up slightly, but again looking pretty worrying. On the other end of the Nifty 50, we've got Sun Pharmaceuticals down 4.6%. Tata actually just moving to be looking still very bearish. And Indiabulls Housing, another one that's really dived of late. China, we see there were many more stocks up. And Hong Kong, we saw a handful of stocks higher. And we still do get some big fallers here, down 3%. Connaught Group, and then in Japan, only a handful of stocks up, so really quite big moves there. Looking to European stocks, yesterday we're not open yet in Europe this morning. The FTSE Informa was the top performer, up 3%. Shire up 2%. AstraZeneca up 1.3%. But on the other side of the coin, we did have BATS down a massive 10.6% yesterday, Ocado down 6%, GVC down 6%. So we're seeing really lots of these charts just breaking their trends and looking more and more bearish. Just Eat down 5.6%, so looking pretty worrying there as well. Taking a look at the 250, we did have Hunting up 3%. Babcock up 2.6%, but terrible looking chart. And if we go to the other end of the scale, we had Sports Direct down a massive 11.6%, and really breaking lower there. Contour Global also down 10%. So we're seeing quite big performances there. And across the board in Europe, we did have some of the Scandinavian stocks up. Subsea up 3%. Informa was actually in that top performer, and Telecom Italia up 2.7%, but massively outweighed by the big falls. Flughafen Zurich down a massive 15%, and SimCorp down 14%, and British American Tobacco we already talked about. Infineon in Germany down nearly 8%, and breaking trends, just looking terrible, underperforming the Dow by 25% this year. That's it for today. Until later this afternoon, we will do the US opening. Until then, happy charting. See you then.